Greetings and welcome to the special Pride edition of Farhang Foundation's Farhang Connect virtual talks. I am Roya Rastegar, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation here in Los Angeles. We are a member-supported, non-political, non-religious, not-for-profit organization with the sole mission to celebrate and promote Iranian art and culture for the benefit of the community at large. Thank you for joining us from all over the world today to help welcome our brilliant guests who have both graciously accepted Farhang's invitation to be here with us. Our first guest is Moj Mahdara, an entrepreneur and CEO. She's an expert in the beauty, wellness, and consumer packaged goods market, and currently the CEO of Beautycon, a globally recognized community of content creators, celebrities, fans, and brands. As CEO, she is responsible for driving brand vision for Beautycon and its growth initiatives, launching the brand globally. Ms. Mahdara is an accomplished speaker, business figure, and an active investor with international recognition for her expertise in Gen Z and Millennial consumer profiles and behaviors. She has been named to multiple lists over the years, including ones in Cosmopolitan and Marie Claire magazine, Fast Company's Most Creative People list, The Hollywood Reporter's Top 25 Most Powerful Digital Players, Women's Wear's Daily's Digital Power Posse list, and Variety's Digital Entertainment Execs to Watch. And she has traveled nationally and internationally to present Beautycon's first market intelligence white paper, FOMO Volume 1. Additionally, Ms. Mahdara is currently working on her first book, and focused on bringing the industry together via thebeautyunited.org. Ms. Mahdara is a first-generation Iranian-American born in Kentucky and raised in Pennsylvania and California. Our next guest is Dr. Roya Rastegar. Dr. Rastegar is an award-winning writer and filmmaker. She most recently produced the documentary series, The Legacy of Black Wall Street for Oprah Winfrey's own network, a romantic comedy feature film, A Venus as a Boy, premiering at this year's Tribeca Film Festival, the widely acclaimed sci-fi thriller, The Obituary of Tunde Johnson for Hulu, and Gaga, 5 Feet 2, a documentary portrait of Lady Gaga. She also wrote the magical realist film Wildness. She earned her PhD from the history of consciousness under the guidance of Angela Y. Davis. She has served on the selection committee of marquee American film festivals, including the Sundance Film Festival and Tribeca Film Festival. And her writing on race and popular culture can be found in Wired, The Nation, The Huffington Post. She teaches critical race theory, gender studies, and film theory around the country, most recently at Bryn Mawr College and UCLA. Rastegar is a first-generation Iranian-American born in Texas and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me give a warm virtual welcome to Moj Mahdara and Dr. Roya Rastegar. Good morning and welcome.
Hi, Rosa. Good morning.
Thank you for accepting our invitation to be with us today. I know everyone's really excited to hear from you. So without further ado, I'm going to step back and hand the reins over to you both. And I will be back later for the Q&A. I'll let you take it over, Roya Jan.
Thank you, Ali Rosa. Thank you for the invitation and for having us. Hi, Moj.
Hi.
Long time no see.
I know, it's been all of 30 seconds.
Talk to me about what it was like for you growing up as an Iranian-American. You were born in Kentucky, and then you moved to Pennsylvania, and then you moved to Orange County. Tell me what it was like for you growing up, knowing you were Iranian, but also really having a strong tie to American culture.
Well, I definitely never thought I would be sitting on a Zoom like this. I think growing up, we did not speak English in the house. We did not eat a lot of American food because I was primarily raised by my grandmother because my parents were very young and they were working. So I don't know that I necessarily even realized that we were not Iranian in Iran until later. Because everything in the house was written, like all the food was written in Farsi, and all the food, like everything that we ate and all the books that, like, we didn't even have very many books that were necessarily in English per se. So I don't know that I necessarily even realized that I was an American until I was maybe in first grade. I think that's when I realized, okay, maybe I'm not living in Iran, in Erie, Pennsylvania, Iran, but that I'm living in the United States of America, where MTV is about to launch and is going to draw my attention into more popular modern culture. But I think I would say maybe the answer to your question is super confusing, because my grandmother, who was, like, my parents were just so young when they had us. So I don't know that they necessarily even really knew exactly like what they were doing per se. And they were dealing with like their homeland was at war, and they were not able to see their own family, not able to see their own parents. They were estranged like from their own community. So I feel like they were dealing with a lot of trauma and stress and anxiety, both emotional, spiritual, and financial. And then they had these kids who are like half American, half Iranian. And then my grandmother, who was, she was a very devout Muslim, and she prayed 5 times a day. And so it was such a mix of a culture to grow up in, because she's actually a lot more progressive than even my parents are in terms of thought and her thinking, but she was very Iranian. So I grew up feeling very almost like missing a place that I'd never been to because of how romantically she described Iran. And she just described it as how you imagine Iran looks and feels like through the food and through the carpets and through the illustrations and all the books. And so it was weird. It was almost like being homesick for a place that I had never been. But also you live in a place in the United States of America that's, very much at war with where your family's from, and you're not from a place that's popular to say that you're from. And it's the Iran-Iraq war, and it's Oliver North, and it's hostages, and it's, I don't know, complicated. It was a complicated experience, I think. How about for you?
I mean, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying. It's like from the inside in our home, it was like all this delicious food that my mom would cook, and we had this beautiful art, and we had, carpets, but also just like the fantasy of Iran, right? I think this is something that like a lot of Iranians in diaspora, like Iranians living outside of Iran, you start to almost like create a portrait of Iran that's not even really, that never even maybe really existed. So I saw these cool like photographs of my parents and my aunts and uncles from like the 70s, and everyone was wearing bell bottoms and like, cute outfits. And so I had this total fantasy of Iran as well. And yet, because you're growing up in, because I was growing up in Atlanta, people knew that I wasn't white, but they also didn't know what I was. So, a lot of people thought I was Black. And, Atlanta is 70% Black. So a lot of people thought I was Black. And so then I was very confused around like my own kind of cultural identity. But when I would like assert, no, I'm Iranian, it would same thing. Oh, you're Saddam Hussein's daughter. Like no understanding of Iran as a place, as distinct from Iraq, like as distinct from Afghanistan, as distinct from all these places. And so, and then also like that awful movie, Not Without My Daughter, really informed my.
I hate that movie. I hate that movie. I hate the people who made that movie.
But like that movie, right? Like I feel like Iranians were so excited to go to the movies to see it because they were so excited to just see Iran on screen. But then I feel like when we got there, we were like, oh no, this is not the depiction of Iran.
I remember like nobody, my friends' parents like wouldn't let their kids come over.
Right. I mean, it was really,
like,
it
assume
really
that my dad was like this. And it's like anyone who, you know, like my dad's a really kind of chummy kind of guy. So like, he's obviously not like, you know, like
he's not
like the bossy person. So it's
I
like,
think those representations, like I think those media representations were like of this Iran that's like a barbaric place, you know, of like a hostage crisis, of like all these awful things. And that really conflicted with the Iran that I had fantasized about, you know, that I had dreamed about, you know. When you started to get more into MTV and American music and things like that, how did you see that as like directly conflicting with Iranian culture?
Oh yes.
Tell me how.
I think I like watched like I don't know, maybe it was like a Michael Jackson video, or like maybe it was a George Michael video.
Probably George Michael.
And it was like a lot of sexual stuff that definitely was not great. Like my grandmother did not co-sign that kind of content. So no, I mean, I just unfortunately remember very clearly when I first saw that kind of content and realized that I really loved it. Yeah, it was problematic.
When did you realize that your sexuality was different than what your parents expected?
Maybe when I first saw those videos, I was like, okay, I feel attracted to these women, which is very strange. Yeah, it felt very strange. Like, because sexuality as a young person is such a, well, first of all, I think, you know, back then, like, I don't think your parents even really talked to you about your parts until you were like 14 or something. Like, it's almost like it wasn't a natural part of the conversation. It's not like today where people are so advanced or progressive with their children. Like, we were, you know, somewhat sheltered. It was the 80s, and yeah, I mean, I think that was sort of the first time I'd ever seen women, you know, with a sense of agency about themselves, having a sexual feeling or experience, and having agency over that content. And so I don't know, maybe I think when I saw like Annie Lennox's like Eurythmics, that's kind of when I knew. I was like, okay, I'm very much like this woman who wants to wear men's clothes and men's suits and have short hair, and like, I'm not someone that gets value out of wearing a dress or being hyper feminine. Like, I think it's because I think art is like my favorite thing, because that's, I think, how I found myself. I don't know that I would have ever found myself had I not seen so many music videos. Like, I think I saw a Queen Latifah video and I was like, oh wow, like this is somebody that I can relate to, that looks like me, that feels like me, that talks like me, that wants to like be in the world like me. And she's very confident, she's very bold, because like it's not like I looked at Julia Roberts and thought one day I will be like that. You know, I would like to date someone like that, but that's not how I see myself. You know, it was strange, but oddly, of all the people in my life to have had insight into that was my grandmother. That was the weirdest thing about it all. She like really understood me, maybe because she knew me from such a small age, that she knew there was no way it was made up or adopted, that it was like something that was inside of me. So she was very sweet and tender about it. She never made me feel bad about it. So it was strange. She would tell me like, your parents are probably not going to be okay with this, but it's fine. Like, God loves you. So that's really what it is. But she wouldn't even say what it was. Like, what was it? Like, it's because not like that we had the words then. She just would, you know, she just knew I was a little bit different. If that makes any sense.
And I think that's I think that's definitely something that's very resonant to me. I think when I came out to my family, I didn't actually come out as like an identity. I just had my partners around, and they were very seamless about accepting like me and how I was, and it kind of didn't really skip much of a beat. I was very worried about it before, but I think there's something to be said for the fact that in our culture, in Iranian culture, I think there are long traditions of women being with women and men being with men, and it not being an identity explicitly, and I also think like gender fluidity is very much part of our culture. And I think it's really like the West's imposition that like has shifted that and has articulated it as a bad thing, and now is articulating it as a positive thing. But I think it's like very endemic to like our culture organically. So it makes sense to me that your grandmother would have been like very acknowledging of that in a very like kind of organic way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why I never really thought much about it until I was much older. And then I realized that I realized I had like a situation on my hands. I think
that's what your parents call it.
Yeah. My parents have called it my situation. My mom calls it my situation.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think it was a real situation, right? It was something that really separated me from that separated me from my community, my family. I mean, I was not, I think, immigrant trauma is such a real trauma that I don't think people talk about enough. I think people who survive, revolutions, refugees, people who have to leave like their homeland to go to another homeland. Like, I just think about sometimes I'm like, okay, we love our house, we love our home, and we have trauma around the idea of just thinking about moving from this home to like another home. Like, should we move to New York? Should we move to another neighborhood? Now, like, imagine you just can't come back to your home. You just can't come back to your neighborhood. Your neighborhood is now called some other neighborhood. Your money's changed. The currency is not the same. The political environment is not the same. I feel like people who've survived and lived through that experience a very extreme amount of trauma that doesn't really get the proper language and vernacular. And I'm frankly surprised, given how many immigrants there are in this country, there's not more education about it, like within our school system, that so many people who come here are coming here for a better life. And even though we celebrate the like American dream of that better life, when it turns out to be the better life, there's still this years and decades of like complete and total struggle that goes on for a lot of families where your kids don't relate to the parents and the grandparents don't relate to the kids, and everyone's talking about life through different context and different words. But you're all kind of living in this pod that brings you together, but then we start to alienate each other in that pod. It's like so many families alienate each other within these pods, and that really terrible. Like, it's not positive that people become alienated from their own communities because of how well they assimilate into new cultures and how well they survive generational trauma. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't think it's something we talk about enough as Iranians. And I think, in fact, mental health isn't really considered as something that's important. Like, I think given how much, hardship and trauma I think Iranian immigrants have gone through, I think we should be all in therapy, and like for a really long time. But therapy, is this like, has become like this kind of bad word in many instances. But I think it's a really important thing to kind of try and figure out how to live like a more whole life.
Well, I think therapy comes across funky because there's like an innate distrust of like people knowing your family's business, and there's a distrust of systems. But you probably, you grew up in the South, like in the deep South, Alabama, like, or Georgia, right? Georgia, Atlanta. Like, what was that like? Because I've always been afraid to go to the South because of how the history of this country unfolded. But like for you, you grew up in the heart of that kind of culture. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because I think growing up, I didn't see racial injustice the way that I see it now. I saw a lot of, we in our communities, I had a lot of, we were called the sand N-word and like, all kinds of like derogatory things as a kid. But then it was really like Black people from Atlanta who were like very open and warm and welcome, and also like liberal white people in Atlanta who were very open and welcoming to our family and really kind of went out of their way. And I remember that as like a huge thing of thinking about how much people would talk about my culture. Like I remember even early kind of telling my doctor, he was asking me something and I was like, oh well, I'm actually I don't sleep with men, so I don't need to kind of take a pregnancy test or whatever it was early on. And he goes, oh, I bet you're so glad you're not in Iran. Right. So it was always this kind of like
People always say that.
Right. People always have this like assumption that like, it's such an awful, barbaric kind of place. And so I would always, go into this mode of like figuring out how to defend Iran. But as I got older and started to really see this country's history of injustice, I really started to realize, wow, this is such a deflection, right? So in the US, there is so much injustice against trans people, against Black people, against Indigenous people, against undocumented
Women,
Mexican American people. Right. There's so much injustice, there's so much inequality, but the focus, rather than like attending to like American culture, the focus always, I feel like, when it comes to Iranians or Iranian Americans, comes to really thinking about like how awful it is, in Iran, where I think
that's part of a larger political agenda of just demonizing the Middle East. And exactly. It was one of the most amazing places I've ever been in my life is Iran. I mean, it's the love and affection of the people there is over the top, shocking, just super, like, it's one of those places I wish I could go to like once a year and be there. I've always had fantasies like, what would it be like if I just moved there? Could I ever live there? And I'm always, that's why I'm a little bit always like envious of your dad, because he lives in Turkey so close. And I imagine that's what makes him so happy to live somewhere that's so close to like his homeland. But being somewhere where people look like you and feel like you and talk like you and think like you, and kind of, because Iranians are so like uniquely, it doesn't matter like what our faith is and what our political positions are, and like, where we stand on different issues, like the way the fieriness, the passionate, the commitment to family and community, like it's such a intense and unique culture, that it's nice to be in a place where you're just dominated by that experience. Like I'll never, ever, ever, ever forget being there for my uncle's wedding many years ago. And it was, someone had just come back from Mecca and was like doing, basically, qeimeh to like the entire neighborhood, and they had the lights over the house. And I've never seen like 1,000 people lining up to like go eat together and pray together. And I think that, that's really, I don't know, there's something very special about that community there and about the people in general.
So let's talk about when we first met.
Okay.
So we had a couple friends who had told us both about each other, and our friends were constantly saying, oh, we know this other Persian gay person, you guys should totally meet, you'll love each other. Yep. And I remember I was very much resistant to that idea completely, because I was like, just because we have that in common doesn't mean that we're going to like each other.
Yep.
And then you when you met me, what was your first impression?
I mean, I thought you were, you have like a light around you. You have an energy around you. I thought you were extremely beautiful, and I really loved your hair, your curly hair. But you were making lubio polo, and it was made with like boca burger meat. So I was like in shock because I had never met a vegetarian Iranian. So I teased you about it. I remember like that was like our first exchange because our friend had invited me to come meet you. The person had said, "Oh, come meet. I've met your Persian wife." And I think I had so much internalized, like even in the beginning, like when Ali Reza was like welcoming us, like I have anxiety in spaces of like with a lot of Iranians, and like Iranians make me have anxiety because I feel such anxiety of rejection. Like I can't even explain that feeling of like walking to a mehmoni and like everyone knows you're different and they're like judging you for being weird. At least they think you're weird.
This is like a real difference between us because I don't have that feeling.
Oh my God.
I think
I feel like for me, like, well, that's because for you pass as like straight. Like I don't pass as straight, you know? So for me, like my entire life growing up and going to like my parents' gatherings, like even though they would stick me in some dress, like I just looked so weird.
Last night when we were prepping for this, I asked you, what's the most Iranian thing about you?
My appetite. I don't know a single Iranian that doesn't like to eat, like not once. Have you ever met any Iranian that's like not a food person? They all say they don't like to eat. They all say they don't want it. They all say that they're not really into food. But as soon as you put a plate of like korma sabzi with some tadik and like some sabzi, like they eat the whole thing. So it's like, I feel like, I have always felt like but not just for food, it's just for life. Like I'm I have a lot of desire. I have a lot of desire. So that hunger is probably something that I feel like Persians are encouraged to have desire or hunger. Like it's good. Like I feel like both of our parents have always, I noticed that both of them are always like, you should try this, you should do this, you should like put yourself out there. There is like a little bit of Iranianness in all of us that feels like we all deserve the ability to like have something. I can't explain it.
Going back to the anxiety that you sometimes feel when you're with other Iranians, it's like, has that shifted as as I've introduced you to more of like my Iranian-American community, who are like so like all these like cool creators and filmmakers and has that lessened since we've been together?
Your family is maybe the most like best shocking thing that's ever happened to me because they're so over the top inclusive. Like I don't think I was expecting of that, and all of your, when we first met, we were coming from such different lives and different circles. So like I felt, your world is so many more artists and academics, and yeah, like yes, that anxiety has lessened, but I just noticed that I still feel anxious. Like whenever I meet, like think about like we went and what was that doctor a few years back that we saw, and like we didn't want to tell him we were together, so I said I was like your cousin, and like like that's like because he was like an older Iranian man, we were like convinced that he's like probably a homophobe, and like it turns out he's like actually one of the most like he's the most progressive, like beyond progressive. But I didn't look at his Instagram before we met him, so I'm like, oh my God, I feel completely ridiculous that every time I meet like a 50-year-old Persian person, I just assume they're gonna like talk badly about me as soon as they walk away.
Yeah, and I think that's important, especially like now as like the world is changing, as culture is changing, as society is changing, to try and give people that kind of credit. I know my dad has been like really incredible to both of us in terms of his like not just like acceptance or tolerance of our relationship, but like going out of his way to tell people that we're together and that he's proud of us. And, you know, I feel like that, you know, kind of like assertiveness of his makes it such that people have to like question whether, you know, if they had any kind of issue before or not, and, you know, kind of really just check it at the door if they're engaging with us. And I think my dad's like approach to that has been like really incredible, and for both of us.
I mean, you know that sometimes it's unclear who I love more, you or your dad.
Okay.
I'm joking, but I do love your dad. Is just, he's the coolest, most progressive person in the space, you know. I really love that about him. And you know, it's been enlightening. It's been enlightening for sure. I mean, he's like, that's how my grandma was, like, really, she's like a judge of character and who you are in the world, and not like the outside parts. And I think that's really amazing, you know.
What would you say to the LGBT community who are living in Iran right now?
Oh my gosh. What would I say to the LGBTQ plus community? You know, I get so many DMs from people about what it's like for them living in the closet. Mostly butch, like mostly gay people like me. The ones who are more like you that can pass straight are
Yeah.
the femmes, I think, are surviving, but they're like miserable because they have a relationship with someone else that they want to be with and they can't. But for the butch queer Iranians, I think it's hard not to feel depressed when I read these texts, because they're so sad. I mean, they're just sad. It's like you're either condemned to live without a relationship in isolation, or you're living in fear of just utter and complete rejection from a societal, religious, spiritual perspective. So, you know, it's also very dangerous, right? Like, it's very dangerous to live somewhere where there's sort of a criminal offense for your way of being. And so, I don't know that I have some perfect advice, because I'm so not in that situation. That's such an extreme situation that I don't know how to say what it is, which is just be safe and take care of yourself, and that your love matters, and that you matter, and that who you are is okay, and that God knows it's okay. And that's the most important thing. And that you just have to do a very good job to make sure that you don't allow societal messages to impact your soul and your brain. So you have to be very strong. And I think that's a lot to ask of so many young people, to be that strong. I don't know what I would do if I was in that situation. Like, I'm not sure, because I'm also incapable of not being myself. I think a lot of people are not capable of code switching. Like, I'm totally incapable of code switching and, you know, memeing like I'm straight. You know, it's like, it's not possible. You know, what would you say?
I mean, I would say something similar, which is just that, like, you matter, like your life matters, that you just have to do what you have to do to hang in there and to continue to be safe, and you know, to continue and try and find a way to live, but also love, and like to not like negate, I guess, like how you are and who you are. I mean, I think it's a very, very difficult thing, but I know that I think Iranians who are in the diaspora, who are outside of Iran, whether they're in the LGBTQ community or whether they're allies, like my friend Tara Grammy and so many others, you know, actively speak out and advocate for LGBT people. I think you just kind of have to hold on as best as you can to those pieces. But I would also say, to go back to a point that you raised earlier, to really, really, really prioritize your mental health. Because I think even growing up in the US and growing up that way, I think even that has been hard, right? So
Of course.
I think it's like, it's one of those things that's like, I mean, you know, the challenges that we still face, right? On a day-to-day basis, right? It's not like, you know, our lives are perfect. We're constantly being confronted with ways in which people are being, you know, homophobic on one hand, or racist on another hand, or sexist in another way, you know? So
do you think it's that, do you think it's that experience for you? Because I always wondered what possessed you to leave banking at such a young age and go from like finance into academia, and then from academia go into storytelling around minority, specifically Black representation within media. Like, do you think that, like, how, like, do you think this growing up as other experience informed that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I think growing up as an immigrant here in the US, I really became very, very conscious early on that my ancestors did not build this country. This country is not built on my ancestors' land. Our land is somewhere else, and our country has like been taken away. And so that's a whole other thing. But that if I'm going to live here in the US, it's my responsibility to fight for the freedoms of Black people and Indigenous people and people of color. And so that was very, very important to me very early on. And I thought that didn't even fully clarify for me until after I left investment banking. I love numbers. I love finance. I love all those things. And I loved doing that. I loved that part of my life, but I really felt this strong urge to kind of create change. And also my dad, when we were younger, would always read us these stories. And so he would tell us this story of Scheherazade and about how, you know, she basically had to tell a story to save her life every night. And that story for me really shows that storytelling is like it's an urgent thing that we need to do. And the best stories are told in an urgent way. And so, yeah, so that's why I started to like really make movies. And, you know, we just won an award at Tribeca, which was really exciting. And I'm starting to direct my own films now. And I have so many projects that I want to write, you know, with your support. So yeah, so I'm super, what about you? How has your kind of Iranian cultural heritage impacted your work as an entrepreneur? You are such a serial entrepreneur. It's just company after company after company. You seem to have zero fear around it. It's really impressive what you do. I understand you do have fear, but talk to me about, you know, that drive, your ambition, and like where that comes from.
I love working on new ideas. I don't know how else to describe it. I have no shame on failing professionally. Like, I kind of feel like early on, you know, both of my parents are entrepreneurs. I remember my dad started like he's an engineer. He had his own company, but then he started this it's like almost like a curried chip made of garbanzo beans in like the 80s. Like, this is a product that had he made it in 2020, it would have killed it in Trader Joe's. It's like, it's almost like you know how they make all those cauliflower, corn-free, grain-free chips now? So he made this, it was called chutneys. And I remember him making it, and then he bought like the machine that makes it and the bags, and he was going to sell it to all the grocery stores, and it just like didn't work. They were delicious, but it didn't work, you know. And he started with his best friend. I just remember very clearly him being like, and on to the next, and on to the next, and
it's
I'm
really
gonna flip these houses or start, like, I think some of that came from being like a tomboy and climbing trees and falling out of trees all the time, and like biking and wiping out on my bike all the time. Like, I was always, you know, like I was always wiping out. I don't know why. There's a part of me that I think I enjoy wiping out a little bit.
I mean, your name is Moj, so that makes sense.
It doesn't bother, like when people are like, oh, you've like had so many like successes, and you know, how about your failures? I'm like, yeah, like I've had some major failures. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know. I love companies. I love ideas. I think my passion to be represented and to tell stories and to make a difference and make a dent very much comes from knowing that my identity and way of being is something that's forbidden and should not exist. It's like my success is almost like a protest. Like I'm protesting everyone that wants to like erase me, delete me, like have me disappear, have me change. And I know a lot of people find that like it's almost obnoxious, my like desire to push forward. And like no one in my life who's ever loved me has not said that my relentlessness can be exhausting at times. But like I think that relentlessness is like my protest, because I feel like if I don't protest, like there's no one I know who's, I mean, that's why we wanted to do this talk, because like when they reached out, I'm like, yeah, I would like to do this talk with Roya, because we don't know any other same-sex Iranian couples or even Middle Eastern couples. We know so few people. We made a very conscious choice to have an Iranian son. You know, I love that, you know, it's like Neve's name is Neve Nazare Rastegar Mahdara. Like, I love that that's, you know, our family. And I think that we made a very conscious effort to not be erased and to not be deleted. And so I guess that's how.
What aspects of Iranian culture that I brought into our house do you most appreciate?
Well, let's first talk about your addiction to rose water.
Okay.
Which I
know you really don't like rose water.
I don't know why. I don't love rose water. But she loves it in everything. Like she can just put it in everything. I was like, sometimes go drink some water. And it's like, oh man, it's like a lot of rose water.
Really relaxing.
Yeah. No, it's water. I mean, I've grown to actually like it. I don't dislike it the way I used to.
Okay, what about in raising Neve?
I mean, you're a super hands-on mom. Like that's very Iranian of you. Like you guys do everything together. You bathe together, you go to the bathroom together, you're together. He's like basically in your armpit all the time. I find his compassion, his empathy, his love, his creativity, his playfulness, he's very Shaytun. He's very, very, very Karam. He has a lot of Karam. And when I'm 100% positive that Karam is an outcome of like you, me, and his donor.
Yeah.
You know, and
100%. And also of all the lavo shack that you guys both break into constantly.
Yes, we have a massive lavo shack addiction.
Honestly.
But
he loves cuckoo.
He loves cuckoo. He loves all the like ashes and khorish that my mom makes him. You know, he likes. I also has a very advanced.
I also make him kalam polo.
You make him lots of kalam polo.
Yeah.
Which he requests on a regular.
Yeah.
So he's very much like a spoiled Persian boy for sure.
Right. And he loves. And he loves Gola Sangam and Daryush.
He does love Gola Sangam and Daryush, and he also loves teqer and dance around. So
his hair is super Iranian.
Yeah, he's a very Iranian hair, which is like why we really wanted a Iranian donor. It was like very important to us. It took us a very long time actually to find, because there was not a ton of Iranian donors, but you did an amazing job finding donor. And I love our donor. And I love that he was actually born in Iran. So Neve is technically like first generation too.
Yeah, he's technically first generation as well.
Yeah. That is awesome.
Ali Reza John, I think you were going to we were going to stop for a second and ask questions.
Yes, but the conversation was so exciting and so interesting that I was just listening on and didn't want to stop it. But thank you for sharing your stories with us. We have a lot of questions from the audience and they're all great, so we want to get to them. By the way, Roya, I'm addicted to rose water as well. So You're not alone in
It's
that.
actually healthy for you.
It is. I put it in everything, from my coffee to anything. So the first question we got is, how do you personally think your Iranian heritage has influenced the way you handle your careers, in particular, disadvantages or advantages? Who wants to take that on?
You want to take it, Roya?
No, I think you should do that one.
Persians are so entrepreneurial, right? So like, I don't really know, like, it's like if you were going to be stuck on an island and you had to pick 5 people, you're definitely picking one of those 5 people as a Persian, because even if they're like a little bit like hosele, they don't have the hosele, they don't have the like, you know, they don't want to like do too many things, they're still very like clever. And I think that cleverness is essential as a part of an entrepreneurship. And I don't know if it's just, I can't explain it. There's a way that Persian brain works that like is always like figuring out these little things that always literally blow my, like the things that my mom thinks about and how she thinks about life. Like she'll be like, did you know if you like fill in this document and then request this office that you can get a discount based on the state of California and you're exempt from this situation? And I'm like, who even has time, or like, how do you even know this information? But like Persian hacks are like a real thing, you know? They're very, very, very Zedang, and that's just like what it is.
That's a great answer. It's so true. For Moj, what inspired you to head Beautycon originally? Were you a fan of the beauty industry in general, or was it just a pure business decision?
It was originally a pure business decision. And then Roya gave me the confidence to be, I would say, a bit more authentic. Like if you look at our creative and our brand and where we started, I remember both Roya and our creative director at the time, Jonathan, and my co-founder, Jonathan, they were like, just be yourself. Like, you know, you have tattoos, like you don't have to grow your hair long. You don't have to like pretend like you're like, you can just be this like queer butch person. And if you do that, like, it'll be way more inclusive, and you can really program this thing from the point of view that you want to program to see the future of beauty. And I think that permission really, like, I think both of them deserve the credit for that pivot of like kind of letting me like take gloves off.
And like from shifting from like being about the beauty industry and being about influencers, but most to your credit, it was also already there. Being authentically you and more Beautycon, making Beautycon more you, also meant making Beautycon about inclusivity, about you know, inclusiveness within the beauty industry. And I think that really shifted like the beauty industry and, you know, culture at large in a different way. But I think that was more, you know, that was about making Beautycon more you. Yeah,
it was definitely time to take the gloves off after that good pep talk.
That's a great answer. And, you know, the first time I heard about Beautycon, I looked it up. This is years and years ago. And I looked you up and run it. And it was so inspiring to me. Not only an Iranian running such a great or big successful organization, because we, as Iranians, we always have so much pride, no matter who it is. If it's an Iranian running are very successful in whatever field they're working on, we get so much pride out of it. But then on top of that, to know someone who's out and, you know, open about their sexuality, on top of that was just extra icing on the cake. On that note, we got a comment. It's not a question. Somebody says, thank you for being out and loud and for sharing your story with us so openly. This means so much to us gay Iranians, to have you out there as role models for our community who many times pretend gays don't exist in our culture. So I think people really appreciate what you guys do and say. For Roya, I have, somebody's asking, I am so impressed by your amazing resume and both past and present projects. In general, what inspires you to tackle a particular project?
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, for me, when I look for projects, I just look for stories that are really compelling, but also will make a shift in culture in some way. There was another question that I saw Alireza too that I thought was a good one that we didn't actually cover about the differences between. We finally started to date an Iranian. Like we both decided to date Iranian after we had dated many other kind of races before, and what that choice was to really like keep it Iranian. I thought that was also a good question. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, that was my next one. I was just saving that one. Let me find it again. Where was it?
In terms of my storytelling, I mean, I have like so many projects. I love my work. Moj can attest to the fact that I have too many things that excite me all the time. But you know, I'm trying to kind of really dig in on my mission of just creating work that also shows like the connection between different kinds of cultures, right? So not just thinking about Iranian-American culture, but looking at the cross-section between Iranian-American and also gay culture and also Black American culture. And because this is something that's more organic and makes most sense to me in terms of what kind of what my life has been. And so that's the piece, and also like a religiously diverse culture, right? So you know, we practice like multiple kinds of like faiths within our relationship, and we're both very spiritual people, but our backgrounds with respect to religion is very different. And so I think that's also good to just show that kind of the intermingling of all that.
Yeah, and I mean, your career is so impressive with the projects you've worked on, and they're all so diverse. You don't have like one particular category you stick in. So I really admire that. The question I think you were referring to was when you were single, both of you, did you see any difference between dating someone from an Iranian background and a non-Iranian background?
Oh, yes. Most definitely. I made a very conscious effort that I absolutely wanted to be with someone who was from the Middle East. That was like a non-negotiable for me. It's so funny because I was like, I want to be with someone from the Middle East. I want to be with someone who is a doctor, and I want to be with someone who loves their family and is tight with their family. Those were the three things I was really adamant about. And then I was like, wait, well, that's why I'm saying it's hilarious, because I made that list and I was like, wait, I know someone who's just exactly this list. Roya. It's the most.
This is, by the way, this is 12 years after she saw my vegetarian lubia polo.
True.
Literally, like, I made the vegetarian lubia polo. She complained about the fact that why was I making vegetarian lubia polo? 12 years later, she comes to me, she's like, listen.
We stayed friends and were in proximity and friendly, you know, throughout that time. But, you know, I don't think I knew what was good for me at the time. I can't speak for Roya. She's, you know, not someone that can be easily influenced. So you have to really work hard to get her attention. She's, you know, very she has a high level of self-agency and doing what she's likes to do. So to campaign for her
is amazing, which is the reason why I have that.
What's it?
My family's just amazing.
Yep.
That's why I have that high level of
I had to really
confidence and all the rest.
I had to like really campaign to get her to want to date me.
It worked. Great.
I mean, it was a process, but I knew there was no way I could be in another situation where you're sitting in like a therapy session and someone is like, all they care about is work and their desire, you know, they're just like they're you know, like it's like Persians can easily get repositioned as like we're not angry, but we're passionate, right? And it's like that fine line in between. But like we understand the fundamentals like of each other. We don't have to explain our parents to each other. We
love going dadar. Like I feel like Iranians, even the most introverted Iranians, love going dadar. Like I'm so studious. Like I literally grew up in a library. I'm not at all like Moj. Moj went to like every single party and club and concert there ever existed from like the age of 16 on. I literally have been to every single library in the world. Like I love libraries. I've collected library cards, but this thing that is, you know, connects us is this thing of we both love dada. Like we love going out.
We like dada. We like going food, family, culture. But I think what Persians do well is, even though you can argue and not get along, like you're not like at war, like it's not over. It's not like you're gonna sever this relationship because you like literally like pissed at each other. I feel like I would always like in my like growing up in my house, like this aunt would be mad at this aunt because this day said this, and then all of us like all like you would see these crazy emotive like TV drama blowouts, and then like 5 minutes later, like everyone just be like crying, like no, it was my fault, no, it was my fault, no, it was my fault, no, it was my fault. And so I think like when you grow around that type of social chemistry, like our just the makeup of how we relate and get along to people is just totally different.
But I should also say that one of the big challenges of the first year or two of our relationship was that we thought, because we were both Iranian, we're both the eldest of three girls, we were both raised in America, we both thought we had so much in common, and we both had we both had assumptions about the other because we just assumed, well, you're Iranian, you understand this. And we didn't realize that we're very different types of Iranians. Like the values in both of our families are very, very different values. And so that was also something that was really, really interesting, right? So that took us a lot to navigate because we came with all these assumptions because we just assumed because we're the same, but we're not the same. Like we're not just very different people, but our background as Iranians are very different. Our families are very, very, very different. In some ways, I wouldn't have ever made that assumption if Moj was like a different cultural ethnicity than mine. I wouldn't have assumed that we would have been so similar.
True.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And on that note, one of the questions is, what is your advice for Iranian queer couples to overcome the restrictions caused by their family and our culture?
I think this is a tricky one. It's about like, I'm wondering if it's queer couples outside of Iran, like if we have to be concerned about like health and safety. If it is queer couples outside of Iran, I would say I think society is shifting like pretty fast, and you know I think it's a risk to come out to your family and to like let them know, but I also think like I think different forms of sexuality and gender expression are really organic to our culture, and they always have been.
Yeah.
And I think there is this thing that like there's this assumption that it's not an Iranian thing or it's a Western thing, and I think that's really not right or fair. I think there are a lot of academics who have written about this. Leila Ahmed has written about this. Mina Muallim has written about this. There's a lot of really amazing Iranian feminists who have done this kind of like actual research to prove that, you know, queer sexuality has been in Iranian culture and history for thousands of years, like for a really, really long time, right? And gender fluidity the same. I mean, which is why, you know, the men and women in the portraits and the like Qajar portraits and before, you can't even tell really who's the boy and who is the girl, right? And I always remember loving those portraits as a child because for me that also really informed my love interest, right? So it was always a little bit masculine of center, but it didn't have a gender. It was beyond gender. So I feel like I would maybe, I think I also really don't believe in coming out as gay, as a lesbian. I mean, I've always hesitated to say I am a lesbian, not because I've been ashamed, not because I've been in the closet, but because I feel like that category is really an identity that is not organic to our culture. And that doesn't mean that our sexuality is not organic to our culture. It's that creating an identity off of our sexuality. So, you know, I have a number of friends who had this kind of like luck in a way, kind of letting, you know, having some kind of acceptance from their family by not necessarily, you know, coming out with this kind of Western concept of like, I am a lesbian, now you need to accept that I am a lesbian, but rather, you know, this is my partner, this is my life, like I'm happy, this is how I'm doing it. But I think it's always a risk. That's the other thing too. But you know, I don't know. I grew up really with this idea of what Iranian men were in my head, and I was terrified of my father finding out. And when my father finally was the one who kind of came to me and was like, "Do you want to tell me something?"
Mm-hmm.
And when I told him, you know, this is this person, like I love them, blah blah. He was like, his acceptance was so kind of, he was upset that I hadn't kind of come out to him and told him before. Mm. And I really had let my idea of what the Western media says about Iranian men and Iranian homophobia, I had really let it influence me, right, from a very personal way. So I think it's tricky. Moj?
I think it's a bigger conversation of why Iranians, because most of Iranian families that are so homophobic to their own children and family members are not doing it because of religion, even though oddly everyone will always say, is it because of religion? It's that Iranians are addicted to what other people think about them. And that addiction is so toxic and so, like, I think it is one of the worst viruses of our culture. It's debilitating emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I think it's a function of the revolution and the trauma. You know, like I know it was always in Iran. I know Iran's a very showy, you know, like I always call Iranians kind of like raccoons because raccoons love shiny things. And you know, we love shiny things. Like I love shiny things, you love shiny things, Roya loves shiny things. We do love shiny things. Neve loves shiny things. His entire wardrobe is filled with glitter and sparkles. Like for some reason, programmed into who we are, we love, you know, shiny things. But this idea that we would alienate our own family and communities over other people and what they think is insane to me. I'm obsessed. I've been consumed with it because, you know, my family members who have not been accepting of me have not been accepting because of God, but because of what will their friends say. And I think Iranians need to normalize, you know, mental well-being, therapy, you know, they need to sort of invest in their own mental health, because I think the pretending like everything is fine, pretending like everything is great, like if someone is employed, if someone is, you know, has a nice home, if someone has a marriage that, you know, we just calculate that as check, they're doing great, they're fine. And I think that we're not fine. You know, I think we're not fine. I think we've been living with a regime, you know, over the past, you know, 20 some odd years, that has changed, you know, a culture that was super dynamic and special and different. But this addiction to what other people think and what other people want and keeping up with the Joneses, I think is really unhealthy. And I think people need to ask themselves, like, the cost of alienating. And I think this talk we wanted to do was, yes, I want to like impress upon everyone who is queer in the LGBTQ plus community of like Middle Eastern and Iranian people, but more importantly for everyone who's actually straight. Like, you know, someone in your family or in your community that's in the closet. I know you do. And I think it's upon you to reach out and like normalize and like be for them like what my grandmother was, which is to say, like, I stand with you, I love you, I'm cool with you, like, and I encourage you to just be who you are. Because if straight, like, heteronormative people don't reprogram the language and the conversation around this, people are going to really be in a lot of dark pain and make choices that, you know, the consequence of that is far worse than an awkward conversation you may have to have with your friend, you know? Right? That's kind of like what I think about. Like when I look at Neve, there's so many things I want of him, and I would love for him to choose things that I want for him, but he's going to choose things I don't want or don't like. But it's hard for me to imagine alienating him from my life over those choices. And I think like we just have to go back to living there, like as a culture, like as an Iranian culture, like we can't penalize each other for being outside the box. If that makes any sense.
I think to that point, I'm sorry if we're going too long, but I think to that point, the other thing that I want to say is for queer people to really be kind to each other. Because I think to Moj's point, it's like we do struggle with mental health, even in like the best of circumstances. Like, you know, my mom and my sisters and my father and like my aunts and uncles and like my cousins, everyone has always been accepting and loving of me. And still, right, we still have this thing inside of us that makes it difficult, right? And so I think there's internalized homophobia. I think there's internalized racism. I think there's internalized, you know, sexism that we like all feel. And I think when you have two women together, especially, that becomes very difficult because you're both coming from like extremely kind of, you know, like you're coming from, it's hard one way or the other, right? And I mean, you know, I think Moj's kind of growing up was much harder than mine, but it's still one of those things that's like, it impacts you, it impacts your relationships. It's time that gets taken away from creative projects. It's time that gets taken away. So you see other people and you think, why are they so much more further along than we are? Why can they have so many other things, right? So also that self-comparison of yourself to people who haven't had to think about their sexuality, haven't had to worry about coming out or not coming out, or how should they come out, or haven't had to worry about their gender expression. Am I trans? Am I this? Am I that? Like all of these kinds of questions, they take up time, they take up energy, they take up space, right? And so I think that kind of comparison of yourself to others is really dangerous because you don't know what kind of, you know, I think it just sets yourself up in a different way. So I think the other advice that I would give to other queer couples and other Iranian queer couples is to just, as best as you can, try and be kind to each other. And I know Moj and I try to do that, but even, you know, we have our, you know, hard times as well.
I think that was great advice. And one thing that you touched on was this concept of aberu, that, you know, we're always worried what other people think about.
Exactly.
That is such an important thing in our culture, which I don't think you see it as much in other cultures. We have a lot more questions, but unfortunately we run out of time. I want to end with this one comment that we got. We got a lot of people with this similar comment. Sarah said it best. She said, just to say, I am honored your sense of responsibility and humanity. And many have thanked you for being open and talking about your personal life and your journey. So people are very appreciative of this. I think this is definitely a tip of the iceberg that we've touched on, and we hope to have more conversations about this in the future. Again, I want to thank Moj and Roya for taking time out of their Saturday to be with us and to sharing themselves. We are honored to have you, and we thank you again. And I want to thank everyone who joined us from all over the world to be with us. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate you.
It was our honor. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.